Okay. So our goal moving forward is to move from our additional reason, our criteria, and our congruence statement into an actual flowchart proof. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to see how what we have already been doing is connected to the proof format. So we've been doing the different components of proof, we just haven't put it in the format of proof. Okay, and then you'll kind of see where level 1 and level 2 kind of fit in there. All right, so what we've been doing so far is we've been looking at the picture and saying, can we add an additional reason, an additional congruent pair, and then why can we do that? Today, you're not going to be worrying about definition of midpoint or definition of bisect or definition of isosceles or right angle theorem or base angle theorem. You're just worried about reflexive and vertical. So just look for those two things, nothing else. And that includes on your homework as well. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I see in this picture a set of vertical angles. So that's this angle here and this angle here. So I marked it, and if you mark it, you have to say it. Okay, now do I have enough? So I'm going to cover up one side of the triangles. And I see a set of sides, and then this is an angle marking. So that criteria would be side, angle, side. Okay, then my congruency statement would be triangle VYZ congruent to triangle. So we started at V and went to Y. So we'll go X up to W and then Z. Okay? And in all technicality, you have completed a proof. You just didn't write it in a proof style fashion. Okay? So what we're going to do today is just transition into how do we take this information we already know and write it into a proof. Okay, the first biggest difference is that you are not going to be given tick marks on the picture at the beginning of any proof. Instead, what you're going to be given is a statement, okay, called the given statement, that has those markings written out as congruent parts. Okay? So there's no markings on the picture. Now what you see in the box, let's just explain the box here. These three boxes, 1, 2, 3, are the three things that you need to have before you can say the triangles are congruent by one of my 5 criteria. Right here. So one of these 5 criteria will go on the bottom. Okay, so let's see what we have. So in each box, you have to make a statement about a segment or an angle that is congruent and why that thing is congruent. Okay, so the first thing you'll see is that YZ is congruent to WZ. We're going to mark that on the picture. Sorry about the extra bells. So YZ, I'm going to put a tick mark there. And WZ, I'm going to put a tick mark there. Now, just the same as before, if you mark it, you have to write it. But this time, I not only have to write Y, I have to actually write that statement as well. So I have to write what is congruent. YZ is congruent to WZ. Why are those congruent? Because it was given to me. Okay, then we move on to the next one. So I have dealt with this given. Let's move on to the next one. ZV, that's this one, is congruent to ZX. So I'm going to write that in here. So every time you mark it, you have to write it. And then you have to say why. That one was also in the given statement. Okay. Then, what goes in the third box? Well, we've already determined what goes in the third box. That's what we put here, our additional reason. So our additional reason is vertical angles. But we actually have to state here in the box which angles. So this is what we practiced when we actually wrote out all of our reasons. We practiced writing out V, Z, Y. So angle V, Z, Y is congruent to angle X, Z, W. So V, Z, Y is this one. X, Z, W is this one. So those are my vertical angles. So those are congruent by the vertical angles theorem. Okay. So now that I have my three things and my picture looks exactly as it did before, I am ready to state that my triangles are congruent by side angle side. Now, the other thing that you'll notice is that statement about the triangles being congruent is actually right here. So the prove statement is going to go here. So triangle VYZ is congruent to, and I'm just copying it, triangle XWZ. And we already determined that the reason was side angle side. So my reason goes in the blank underneath here as well, side angle side. One thing to mention is as you're doing your proofs, you can look at what you have here. This is a set of sides. This is a set of sides, and this is a set of angles. So those three things together, obviously it's not in this order down here, but you should have in your congruency statement 2 S's and an A, which I do, 2 S's and an A. Okay, let's try that again with the one on the right-hand side, the number 2. Okay, so again, let's go back to what we were doing before. Look at the picture here. I've got these markings already. What additional thing do I need? These two triangles come together and are fused together at MP. So I'm going to put a marking on MP. And if you mark it, you must say reflexive property. Now, if I look at my criteria here, again, I have side, I have a set of sides, and I have the angle in between. So it's actually the same criteria that I had before. And triangle, so it goes LPM. So start out here at L and then into P. So over here we'll go NP and then M. Okay, so we're going to do that same proof, but we're just going to do it in the real format of proof. Okay, so every proof is going to start not with a marked picture, but with a blank picture and some given statements. Now, these are the very basic simplistic proofs, so you might be thinking at this point, like, this seems way too silly. Why are we doing all this extra stuff? And believe me, there's more to it, but we're just starting out pretty straightforward and as simple as we can. Okay, so the first one, angle MPL, so angle M, P, that's where you're going to put the marking, L, so mark that. It does not say to mark it as 90, so I'm not going to mark it as 90. Is congruent to MPN, so that's this one. Now, if you mark it, you must write it and say why you're able to write that. Well, that one happened to be in the given statement. So I took care of that one. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark LP. So LP is a segment, so I'll mark it with a tick. NP is a segment, so I'll mark that with a tick. If you mark it, you must put it and say why. Okay, the last thing is we kind of covered this up when we looked at it and we said, is there anything else I need? So I took care of those two things, which happens to be an angle and a side. So far down here we know we have an angle and we have a side. What else do I need? Well, we already talked about this needing a reflexive side, which is this one here. So I'm going to mark it. If you mark it, you must write it. What do I write for reflexive property? Reflexive property is always going to be these two letters, MP, is congruent to itself. Okay, now I have the three things that I need to prove that my triangles are congruent. There's another side in there somewhere. So triangle, and you can just copy this for right now. You just copy this down. LPM is congruent to triangle NPM by, we already determined it up here, but make sure that the number of S's that you need to have are actually in the statement. So we already said it's side, angle, side. Okay, so we're going to give you a little bit of a how-to guide for proof that we're going to keep coming back to. So that's the basic idea, and that's what your homework 22 on Go Formative is going to be like. But we're going to give you like an instruction manual for proof and a why. Okay, so this last part right here is just basically our justification of why do we need to do this, and also give you an instruction manual for how do we do it. Okay? So why do we do it? Well, mathematicians are expected to justify their work, and one way that we justify it is using proof. Okay, we justify it using this technique that we're talking about. There are two different formats that we are going to look at. There are more than just two, but we are only going to look at flowchart proofs and two-column proofs. Okay, so now down here, we're going to talk about the different parts of proof. So the goal is to support our idea with a complete explanation, and here's how that explanation breaks down. We start with the given statements. The given statements is information that we need, and we are told at the beginning of the proof. So it's information that we are told is true from the beginning of the proof. The second thing you have, so the very first thing you have is the given. The second thing that you have is you have your prove statement. So prove statement is the actual goal of the proof. So that's what I want in the end. The third part are your statements. So you make certain statements. Okay, so for example, let me give you an example of that. We just wrote MP is congruent to MP. That's your statement. Okay, these are both true and helpful. You can make a statement that's true and not helpful, but it doesn't move you towards the goal, which is the proof statement. Okay, and the last part of proof is your reasonings or your reasons. So an example of reason would be the reflexive property. These are justifications for why you are allowed to make the statement and why each statement is true. Oops, sorry about that. Why each statement is true. Okay, so those are the 4 different parts, and I'm going to show you where those parts go. Over here on this big picture. So this is the kind of the template of a flowchart proof. Now, you did not, just a second ago, see these bubbles up here, okay? And those bubbles that are up there are going to be up there if and only if. So sometimes you're going to use them and sometimes you are not going to use them. We're not ready to use them yet. That's why they didn't show up. But if you were ready to use them, what would you put up there? Well, you would put givens up there that require some extra knowledge to be useful. Okay? Think about statements that are, think about given, think about angle bisectors, think about midpoints, think about, oops, sorry, this is about midpoint. The midpoint was supposed to go here. Think about midpoints, angle bisectors, isosceles. If it's got that word in it, it's going to go in these first boxes. Okay? Anytime you see these blanks across underneath each picture, those blanks are for reasons to explain what you have done above. Okay? These 3 here are all going to be givens if you even use them. They don't have to be filled in. You might have definition of midpoint or vertical angles, something like that. Those would be down here. So these reasons down here could be given, definition of, ... reflexive, vertical, etc. That's what's going to go here every time. In here, you could have givens if they don't require extra information. And in our first proofs about congruent segments and or angles, our given statements went here. Okay, and then down at the bottom, this is where your prove statement is going to go because you've made it to your goal. Okay, so that's just kind of a basic template about what goes where in a proof.